Well, hello, everyone. My name is Susan Damiani, and I am the Director of Gift Planning at St. John's University, and I'm the host of today's St. John's Power Hour, number 22. And I am here with a prestigious panel. I feel very honored to be amongst their company, and you will know why when I start to share their bios. Their bios are totally amazing, and it would take an hour to read all their accomplishments. So I'm just going to highlight a few for you. So our moderator today is Dr. Antoinette Collarini-Schlossberg, and she's our Associate Professor of Criminal Justice, Legal Studies, and Homeland Security for the Leslie H. and William L. Collins College of Professional Studies at St. John's University. She is also a licensed psychologist with a specialty in forensic psychology, and she's had managerial experience in criminal justice at the cabinet level for the Westchester County in New York. Now today, the whole reason why we're here, and I want to thank him because he brought all these wonderful people together for me. We have Jerry Aylward, and he is our author of Francis Crowley, Killings in New York City and Long Island. So we're going to go back. I'm sure everybody's tired of the news. So let's go back to 1931, and we're going to talk about a horrific murder that took place in North Merrick, Long Island. And Jerry is a retired Nassau County police detective. He's been a detective for 32 years. He also served 10 years in federal law enforcement with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as a criminal investigator with the Office of the Chief Security Officer. And he's also a licensed private investigator for anybody who may need one. So thanks, Jerry. Now, you talk about St. John's is a really small world. And in my almost 16 years at St. John's, when I bring donors and alumni together, it always happens that somebody knows somebody and they're connected somehow. It just makes it a really small world. And this actually happened with this story. So when we were promoting it to the McAllen Society and Laughlin members, two of our members, Elizabeth Feis and Gerard Fernandez, contacted us, and they said, we know a little bit about this story. So our next guest that is joining us for this discussion is Gerard Fernandez. He's not only a McAllen and Laughlin Society member, but he's also a graduate of St. John's Law School and also a graduate of Brown University and a graduate of NYU's Graduate School of Law. And he joined Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, the largest public finance firm in the country. And he became a partner in 1960 till 1994, and then served as their counsel from 1995 to almost present day. And so that's like, I guess, about 60 years, which is pretty amazing. And he represented many banks and trust companies in New York City. And he's with us today because he knows the family of the police officer that was murdered by Crowley. So he's going to share his experiences, and also just living in 1931. It's just so interesting to hear Jerry talk about what New York and Long Island was like back then. And then another prestigious alumna is joining us today, Elizabeth Feis, and she's also a Laughlin McAllen Society member. She's a graduate of St. John's University Law School. She's an undergraduate of St. John's of University College on Schermerhorn Street in Brooklyn, which is a campus that has since closed in 1972. And then she received a doctorate law degree, an honorable doctorate law degree in 1984 from St. John's Law School. She began her career on the faculty of Seton Hall Law School in 1971 and then was the dean 1983 to 1988. She currently serves, and this is a mouthful, so bear with me, serves on the Council of International Affairs and the Committee of Foreign and Comparative Law for the Association of the Bar of the City of New York. And she has lectured internationally on human rights, rule of law, democracy, constitution buildings, electoral reform, and standards for independence of the judiciary, which I would love for you to come back and talk a little bit about that with us at another Power Hour, Elizabeth. But that is our panel today. So I'm very impressed. I hope you are too. But we are going to talk about a real life human story. And it's a tragic one. And I'm going to turn it over to our criminal justice expert, Professor Schlossberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And the topic today is a really interesting one. I happen to be someone who likes to look back at history. I think it's part of knowing where we've come from helps us to know where we are now. And unfortunately, too often history is ignored. I'm really glad to be able to really get the story started with Jerry Aylward. This is the book. I'm going to kind of show it periodically so you kind of see what it looks like. And it even starts out with a picture that will have more meaning as we go along. But of course, this is also an encouragement to everybody to think about getting a book on some history that takes us back to Nassau County and New York City and even Westchester County, where I spent a good chunk of my career. So Jerry, let me, of course, ask you to first talk a little bit about, you were a Nassau County cop, and my experience with cops, having been married to a former cop myself for many years, there's always a storyline that goes with whatever our story is now. Tell us a little bit about your history in Nassau County and how you got to the point of investigating this story.
All right, well, thank you. And first of all, thank you for having me. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this horrific crime. I became a Nassau County police officer in 1970. I was a uniformed cop for a couple of years, then I went into the detective division. I spent 13 years as an undercover narcotics detective, and then I went to the precinct squads, and I was assigned to the 1st precinct in Baldwin. And that's where I first learned about Two-Gun Crowley when I was in the academy, but it took on a better meaning and a closer meaning and a more personal meaning when I was in the 1st precinct, because that's where the crime was committed. That's where he was murdered. So, and on top of that, one of the other police officers in the precinct happened to be the murdered patrolman grandson. So it had a personal meaning all the way around, especially with the location and things like that. Yeah.
So actually, that kind of takes us to really the beginning of the story. We have two important characters in this plot. One is certainly Two-Gun Crowley, and then the crime you're talking about is Patrolman Hirsch, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was
the one that really brought everybody together to try to catch Two-Gun Crowley. So tell us a little bit about the background of Two-Gun Crowley. Maybe how did he get the name? How about that?
Well, he got the name from actually shooting a New York City detective. What happened was Francis Crowley was he was the illegitimate son of an unmarried woman, and she gave him up for adoption. She turned him over to Catholic Charities in New York City, and in 1911. And what happened was the times were very tough in the slums area, and the whole storyline morphs into another woman who also had problems. She lost her husband, and what she did is to make some money, she created and started a baby mill, which a lot of people may not be familiar with. But to get by and for a woman without a husband and she no talents or no experience in the workforce, she started taking on babies through adoption through different agencies, Catholic agencies in New York City, and that she took on this child, and she gave him his name of Crowley because that was her last name, and she named him Francis, and she continued with her baby mill, and that's how he was raised. And he was pretty much raised on the streets and the slums on the east side of New York. So,
what would you say about the kind of person he was growing up? As a psychologist, we're always interested in knowing a little bit about who was he as a child. What was your sense of it? And I know there's some limitations because you had to kind of pick through newspaper articles and such in order, and people who maybe knew him or knew family members. But what would you say about the kind of personality and maybe even intelligence of Two Gun Crowley, Francis Crowley?
Well, I believe his developmental years were hampered, and going back to the newspaper articles, a lot of those were misquoted, misrepresented. Storylines weren't always the greatest. They were never accurate. But I believe as a foster child, he was merely there for the money, which was almost like $1 a day for his adopted or his foster mother to make. He pretty much fell through the cracks. He was at a loss. He had some identity issues with him. He had a very strong, thick lisp, and he was very short. So he had some underlying issues that he had to fend off through his going to school, his formative years, and he pretty much took on an attitude which is not unheard of, for a child in poverty and living off the streets, and he wasn't. It was easier for him to misbehave than it was for him to comply and get an education.
At what point do you get a sense that he started committing his crimes? And he did a lot of different things before he started murdering people, I believe.
Well, that's true, but he also there was no father figure in his life. There was no adult male in his life except his foster mother's biological son, who in itself was a psycho himself. He was a criminal. He was a murderer himself, and this is the only person or the only male that Francis had to look up to, and this is what he mimicked pretty much,
He became the role model for behavior and also a partner in some of the actions, I believe, as I recall.
Well, more of a role model, more of a leader, and he did teach you how to steal cars and things like that. I mean, there was a big span of I think it was 14 to 15 years difference, and which is tremendous amount, for growing up and stuff like that. But his criminal element side, he was pretty much guided by that, by John Crowley, which was the biological son of his foster mother.
Elizabeth, I'm going to turn to you for a moment, and Gerard, I will certainly come back to you. Elizabeth, when you heard about this story, what connection did it make for you? You had an aha moment with this.
Absolutely. Growing up as a child, we would visit our family, my mother's family in the Bronx. We were from Brooklyn, and twice a year we would go to the Bronx and visit her family and visit her uncle, Dominic Casso. And when we did, and he was this iconic big figure, and all I knew about him was that he was responsible in some way for the capture of Two Gun Crowley. I had no idea who Two Gun Crowley was, but it always stuck in my mind, So that's when I heard about that. That's why I'm particularly interested in the story, to learn a little bit more about my uncle, actually. Yeah.
Coming back to you, Jerry, as he was growing up, Two Gun, I read something which was a new concept to me. I read about the dance halls of Manhattan and what did they call them? Taxi dancers. I had not heard, I thought I knew some of the historic terms that were part of our culture, but that was a new one to me. Could you tell us a little bit about the taxi dancers and how that played into his activities as he was a young guy. He was maybe 17, 18 years old when he was going to these dance halls.
Yeah, that's correct. The term taxi dancer it came from an organization that started over on the West Coast, where in the Barbary Coast, and it was where men would go visit the bars, and the girls would have them buy drinks and stuff like that, and the girls would get a little bit of a cut, a commission from how many drinks they would get. Well, as it morphed into the system and it moved across the country, and it ended through Chicago, but it went through Chicago, but it ended up in New York. The drinks now became dancers. The girls would now dance, and what they would do is they would dance, and they would sell a dance for a dime, and half the cost of that dance would go to the owner of this establishment, which were they called, taxi dancer halls or dance halls, and the girl would keep half. So they also were called nickel hoppers. So they would dance with a patron for probably not even 2 minutes, because the dance didn't last 2 minutes, and there were many girls, and the boys or the men could go into these dance halls and dance with any girl they wanted, and they became familiar with the girls, and some of the girls became familiar with the patrons, and they would get for a dime you could dance with a girl, and this is where Francis Crowley, because he was a little trouble meeting girls because he had some issues and stuff like that, it was a perfect place for him to go meet a pretty girl and dance with her. And this is where he started hanging out at the taxi dance halls, and that's how it came about. But that was very popular at the time, and it actually, some of them lasted over 50 years into New York City.
Well, I was also thinking that the reason it was called taxi was probably the cost of a taxi cab at that time was probably a nickel or a dime.
Well, that's the other part of it. The girls were actually, you only paid for the amount of, the ride, for the dance and for the ride, and that's how. But there was some big movies. Barbara Stanwyck was in a Taxi Dancer, and there were some other things. But it was, at the time, it was very big.
I'll have to watch for those on the AMC and Turner Broadcasting. Love those old movies.
Right.
Sue, could you show us a picture of Two Gun Crowley when he was a young man? I think you have one, just to give because one of the things that's really interesting in this book is some of the old pictures, and there's a picture of him. He was already, at this point, it was when he was arrested, but you get a sense of what he looked like, and he did go through the fingerprinting, certainly when he was arrested, but we're not even going to get to that just yet. Okay, just wanted you to have a snapshot. Jerry, could you tell us a little bit about the woman he met, Helen?
Well, he actually met a couple different women, but he on one of his excursions, he would come to Long Island, and he met a young girl. She was only 16. Her name was Helen Walsh, and he met her in Nassau County, down at the beach, and he liked her a lot, and she liked him, but he also thought of her as a decent girl, not a taxi dancer.
Let me stop you for a minute. Could you bring up, I think it's the next picture. We could see a picture of Helen. There we go. Go ahead, Jerry, tell us some more about Helen.
Yeah, that's Helen Walsh. She was from Brooklyn, but she would spend the summers out in Merrick. Her mother and father were separated, so she would spend the summers in North Merrick with her father, and that's how she came to be associated with Crowley and some of her friends.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we could bring it back to Jerry. We'll get to another part of the conversation. Sue, if you can do that. You're great. I'm so glad that you're able to bring us back and forth. How about if we move towards it? How many people do you think he killed? I mean, how many do we know for sure, and how many did they actually attribute to him, that where they had the evidence of his killing people, and especially cops? He really targeted cops.
Yeah, he targeted cops a lot, and what he did is, but he was always doing stick-ups. He liked to shoot people. So the exact amount of people that he actually shot and killed is probably unknown, because a lot of times they were not investigated, or if it was just a mugging or something like that, it would go, unsolved. And what happened was he shot a New York City detective, which actually gave him some notoriety. But before that, he was just a regular stick-up man, and he was doing drugstore stick-ups, and he was doing pedestrian stick-ups or muggings. But he was also a brazen, and he would do clothing store stick-ups. He would stick up anybody.
What was different about the killing of Patrolman Hirsch? That seemed to be kind of a climactic crisis in his activities.
Well, it was. I mean, actually, the police were actually hunting him for shooting a New York City detective before that, and they had what they call an all-points bulletin, or what they call a BOLO, be on the lookout for. And again, because of the times, 1931, communication wasn't moved quick, because you had no radios in the police cars or anything like that. So when he actually shoots and kills Patrolman Hirsch, which in itself, there's a story of how he gets shot and killed. But yes, it did put him on the manhunt, and you had every cop in the nation was looking for him, and especially New York City cops, because they knew who he was. They knew he was from the area, and everybody was looking for him. You had thousands and thousands of cops looking for him.
Gerard Fernandez, I know you're on the phone with us. Is it correct that you had some kind of a connection to Hirsch in some way?
Well, I was all in the 1B at that time. We had an A class. It was from September to January, and the B class was from end of January till June. And there were two daughters that I knew of. One was Cecilia, and I think she was in my class in the first grade. And the other was Felicia. I believe she was about 2 or 3 years ahead of me, or ahead of us. And it was in the Belmore School. I think the Hirsches lived in Belmore, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
And we first learned about this through the school. Now, my mother was scared to death after that, because she was already on tenterhooks because of the Lindbergh murder, kidnapping and murder. And so now with Crowley on the loose, I had to stay within eye shot of my mother. But we went to school, and I think Mrs. Walters, I believe, was the teacher. And she said one day that she had some bad news or something to that effect, that Cecilia and Felicia's father had been killed by a gunman named Two Gun Crowley. And I didn't realize, I thought it was in Merrick, but that's memory fades. Just incidentally, two different anecdotes. Jerry, when you were on the detective force in Nassau, was Frank Klesak the head of the detectives then?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you know Frank Klesak?
He was a very close friend of mine.
Yeah, he was a very good detective. Very good boss. Very good boss. Frank Klesak.
Met him in high school.
Yeah, very nice guy. Very nice guy.
And then,
Excuse me, let me stop you just for a second. Sue, could you bring up the picture of Patrolman Hirsch? It's not a very nice one, but it certainly gives a feel for the pain and suffering that happened. And I don't want to cut you off, Gerard. You can certainly talk a little more from your perspective on the case. You were talking about the two daughters that were in school at the time, and I suppose this was Dad, huh? That they killed, and this is the scene where he was murdered, and everyone is coming to check the body. As you can see, these pictures are, to me, they're fascinating, and you have to keep in mind this is a big part of Jerry's book. So if you have interest in I was always interested in photo psychology, and I look at the pictures both from a psychological point of view and, of course, historical. So I really enjoyed these pictures quite a bit. Gerard, a few more comments? Gerard, a few more. Any other? I don't want to cut you off. Any? Do you want to add to what you're saying?
That's all right. That's all right. Well, the thing I most remember is I think we had a funeral cortege that went down Sunrise Highway the day that Fred Hirsch was being buried. I think he was buried over in Greenfield Cemetery, but I have no proof of that.
Interesting.
And we all marched down Sunrise Highway, I think. It's a Merrick, borderline, and then I guess we were either dismissed for the day or we went back to school. But it hit the whole school. You know, this was a fairly rural area at that time. And I was out there because the doctor in Brooklyn, where I was born, told my mother to get me out of the city. So we had friends in Belmore, and that's where we moved. But that's my main memory was the two girls. And the tragedy, it just struck the whole community. Belmore, Merrick, North Belmore. The whole Nassau County was shaken up. We never had anything like that happen before in my memory, and then my parents' memory, and some older friends that lived there for a longer time. It was a terrible thing.
Well, it certainly seemed to bring on the resources of the Nassau County, excuse me, the Nassau County Police. And it looked to me like there was really quite a big search, and there was really a siege. And Sue, can you bring up the next picture, which is the arrest? And maybe, Jerry, you could tell us a little bit about what happened here and how that, and kind of I'm not going to ask you to bring it to the final chapter, because I think the readers need to take a look at the book and buy the book, which I'm going to show again, and I'll show it a few more times. But could you tell us a little bit about this scene? I thought it was a very powerful scene.
Yeah, for the time it was very powerful. And there was a lot of, excellent police detective work that went into it. And one of the major investigation detectives doing it was Dominic Queso. So, and his partner, Bill Mara. So they were excellent detectives, and they roamed the whole city, and they actually happened to be investigating Crowley for the shooting of another New York City detective. So when they were looking for him, they pulled out all the stops and they did everything they could. And this is the scene at 303 West 90th Street where they actually had him cornered on the 5th floor. And this siege actually lasted for a couple hours. There were over 200 cops. There was over 10,000 spectators because the word spread very rapidly that they had cornered Two-Gun Crowley. And the shootout, and this is for Elizabeth's uncle, and some of the Nassau detectives and stuff like that. They were actually stuck in the stairwell, having a shootout for a couple hours with Two-Gun Crowley and his associate. And there were over 700 rounds fired into that two-room apartment. So they were there for a couple hours. These guys, and these were good detectives. They were excellent detectives, you know. So, but they actually captured him. They didn't kill him. They captured him. They could have killed him and stuff but they brought him to trial, and he stood at trial for shooting and murdering Patrolman Hirsch.
And you know what? It's also to me. Some of you may or may not know. My husband is Harvey Schlossberg, who's basically his claim to fame is he created hostage negotiations as practiced by NYPD, the FBI, and police departments around the country. So when I see a big crowd and I know there's cops that are surrounding the bad guy, I always think negotiation, but they brought him out alive even though they didn't negotiate. They used a lot of rounds in that case.
They talked to him. There was some yelling back and forth, and being that he was so adamant, I think one of his famous words were, come and get me, copper. So, it was the times,
And they got him, and they brought him out alive, and they followed through on our rule of law, our process of law, the judicial system, and it was really a good case.
Right.
Susan, did you want to bring it back to you and take it to the next step? I see the time is clicking away.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Schlossberg. I appreciate it. I just want to make mention. I know Jerry mentioned Elizabeth's uncle, and I still find it so fascinating that, you know, we were able to connect, two people to the story. So you must be very proud, Elizabeth, of your uncle.
Well, I am, and I am from a family of law enforcement. My father was NYPD. I started my career at the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. So I've been involved in this for quite a while. And the reason I think that Two-Gun Crowley was bandied about in my family so much was because he was a cop killer. And at that time, you couldn't do any worse crime than be a cop killer.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm sure that all the stops were pulled out. And, I'm so delighted that it was my uncle, Dominic Casso, who got a lot of publicity from what I understand at the time. Of course, it was before I was born, because at that time, there was a lot of, discrimination and stereotyping of Italians. And here we had this iconic figure. He was very famous at the time, doing a positive image for Italian Americans. So, that also was something that perked my interest in this.
He did something else that a lot of people are not familiar with. Him and his partner were actually, the Nassau County Police Department put up a reward for the capture of Crowley, and it was $2,500.
Wow.
Well, your uncle and his partner actually received the $2,500.
Uh-huh.
So when they got the checks, they each got the checks, $1,250. They immediately endorsed the checks and gave them to Patrolman Hirsch's wife.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
No, it wasn't just capturing him. They had an intimate role all the way through because, a lot of people don't realize this, but murder affects generations of people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you murder somebody, whether murder Hirsch, it just has a domino figure all the way through life. So, and what he did and what the two New York City detectives did was very famous. Was very generous and very famous, because they could use the money too. Times are rough. That was the Depression.
My uncle,
right?
They
Exactly.
had steady jobs, of course. With the New York City. That's probably why my father was on the police force also, because he did a good job at the time. And my uncle Dominic lived on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, and for us that was, that was quite a thing, quite a swell, at the time.
Right.
When we would visit him. And he also didn't have any children, and he was quite the man about town.
Yeah.
Mm.
Very good
That's
detective.
interesting.
Yeah.
You answered my question, because I was saying, why do you think the story passed down to many generations about your uncle? And you clearly stated that. And he sounds like a really great man.
He's a New York figure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah.
It's the blue jeans. It seems like it passed down to you, right? And what about the rest of your family? Is everybody in law enforcement?
Not everybody.
No.
I have a sister and a brother, and my sister, who's a nun, was the chaplain at Rikers Island for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
And she, I think, went to court more than most lawyers did, representing or accompanying her clients,
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Interesting family. Thanks for sharing. That's terrific. I have a question for Gerard. You were mentioning how your mother was so nervous for you to go out and about because of the Lindbergh and now this story. You're saying that it was a big story on Long Island. How did everybody else react? Like, how did the principal, the teachers, give us a little, I know you gave us a little account on how serious it was, but was it like, what we have with terrorism? Was the school locked down, or was there any extreme measures?
they didn't lock down the school, but it was a sort of a subterranean period of gloom that, that this possibly could happen at this part of Long Island. I mean, yes, without being discriminatory, New York City was well known for this sort of thing. But to think it happens in North America, Long Island was, this was nice people. They were still foreign. They were still, commuting was in its infancy. And the Long Island Railroad electrification along the South Shore was only 6 years into existence.
Wow.
I went to Belmore School along with the two Hirsch girls, and that was a new building. But my cousin, who was 10 years older than I was, he had attended some classes in a storefront on, I think it was on Grand Avenue, downtown in quotes. And it just shook up everybody, my gracious, shooting a cop. Now, some people, it didn't bother them at all, I guess. It was a shame that it happened, but life goes on. But I know the effect in the school was, we knew these people. And we felt very strong. They were lovely girls. They were a nice family. I don't think I may have met the mother. I don't think I met the mother. At a PTA thing or something like that, or a class day. In those days, just to give you a little background quickly, we didn't have school lunches at those times. My mother would come over at a little before noon. It was maybe about a half or 3/4 of a mile walk. And she'd pick me up and take me home for lunch. And then after lunch, she'd take me back to school for the afternoon. And we had no kindergarten. People said you go to kindergarten. We didn't know what kindergarten was. So this is a year earlier. Merritt Gables was one of the first developments on the South Shore of that part of the island. And that was in its infancy. I'm not sure it wasn't fully built. It was at least started. But that's that. We had two lots. One had the house, and the other had it was an open lot, and it still had the furrows from where they used to plant corn. And you'd walk along, it was like a bump here and there because they had planted corn years ago. It was a different thing. It was Sunrise Highway. I remember when Sunrise Highway was built. I remember when Jones Beach was built.
Wow.
So that's how far back it goes.
And Jerry, what happened to the daughters? Did you ever know, did the family go on? Were they okay?
Did. They had, Patrolman Hirsch had four children, 3 daughters and a son. And the son actually became a Nassau County cop. And his son, which would have been the murdered patrolman's grandson, actually became a Nassau County patrolman. And I worked with him. And they all had the same shield number, the department passed on the same shield number and stuff like that. But Gerard, I just want to answer. You were talking about Merritt Gables, but just to let you know, in my research, I found that Two Gun Crowley was doing a lot of stick-ups around Merritt Gables, so it really came close to home to you too. So, Yeah.
I only lived about 2 miles from the Gables.
Yeah, he was doing stick-ups down there too. Yeah.
Well, we knew the name.
Yeah.
He was famous or infamous is a better term.
Yeah.
And he had a name. That's why everybody was so shook up, because the guy stick-ups were anything but shooting the cops or something different.
Yeah.
Far different.
Yeah.
No, you have to understand, this was not suburbia in the more modern terms. This was, my father never commuted in his life. My mother and father were both from the city, and my father had to adjust to, riding the train and the subway to go to work. So it's a different world.
Yeah, it was different.
Yeah.
And Gerard, didn't you say you were friends with Dominic's brother? The detective's brother?
Now,
George. You mentioned George.
George Queso and I sat next to each other the first day in school, the first day in the first grade, and we became very fast friends.
Was that
And
related
he
to your
became a
uncle,
doctor.
Elizabeth? No,
No,
I thought
I
maybe
know
that was
the same.
Elizabeth's, was that another uncle of yours? Or no? No, I just thought the name, I just
Well, the county
wasn't
exec for
sure.
one of the Nassau County execs was Ralph Queso, and I think Gerard's talking about
Oh,
his
okay,
brother.
I
Talk
see.
about his brother.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, thank
That's
you.
But they were from
Thanks.
the Merrick area too.
He
Yeah.
was the older brother of George,
Yeah.
and the
Oh,
Casey's
okay.
had the first supermarket on Long Island.
Yeah.
In Belmore.
Yeah.
And
That's
it was
great.
past
Well,
for a supermarket.
thank you for sharing. I just think it's just remarkable. I mean, I can't remember what happened 2 months ago, and you can remember back 1931.
I
Your
know,
school
unbelievable.
teachers even.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love your memory.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it certainly
Well,
is great sharing it with us. Jerry, I want to get back
Nice.
to Jerry. I mean, you shared a
just-
little
just
bit
quick.
of, I'm sorry, Gerard, did you want to say something else?
Just quickly,
Sure.
on the memory subject, by the time this happened, I've already seen Babe Ruth hit 2 home runs.
I love it. Who could say that?
Yeah.
Lucky you.
Absolutely.
Lucky you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
So Jerry, you mentioned it maybe in the early discussion, but really what, besides, I guess you're retired and you're looking to do something during your retirement, what really made you write this book? What really inspired you?
Well, there was a couple of different reasons. One, I mean, I had a close association with the grandson. He worked in the same precinct. And there was a couple other things. I had written a book, pictorial book, history book for Nassau County Police Department a couple of years ago. But one of the other things too was the area where he was killed. There's no markers. There's everybody's forgotten about it. It had a direct, like Gerard said, it had a direct, horrific comment on the community. It hurt the community. It hurt the family. And because I actually like history and stuff like that, I don't think this guy should go, and I'm not talking about Gerard Crowley, I'm talking about Patrolman Hirsch, should go unnoticed in the community what he gave up for, So, and that's why I wrote it.
And in terms of like famous criminals that we always read about, in this time period, was he considered, like, was he up there with like the top 10 famous ones?
No, he was a gangster. They used the term gangster for anybody who was in a gang. And every block in New York City had a gang. But he wasn't a part of the organized crime. He wasn't part of some of the other ones, the Lucchese's or the Gambinos. He wasn't in the organized or anything like that. He was a street level thug and with a gun. And that's how he measured himself up. He liked to shoot people. And again, he just brought it out to Nassau County. And Patrolman Hirsch was Nassau County's first murdered police officer. And it was kind of interesting because that's why they created the Nassau County Police Department, was because, like Gerard said, the element of New York City was coming over into Nassau County and they wanted to stop it. So they created the police department. So, but yeah, I mean, he wasn't anywhere near the thugs of the organized crime or anything like that, which made it even harder for the detectives to run down and stuff like that.
Sure. It must have been exhausting. I mean, it took a long time, right, to catch him?
No, they actually did it.
Really?
They actually, the whole thing lasted 75 days. From the time that he started, shot the first cop and they really got on his tail and stuff like that. But I believe it probably was only 2 months. The detective Queso and Mara were chasing him down, and then after he killed the Patrolman Hirsch, it was just it was 2 days before they had him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is unbelievable. With no communication.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Yeah,
and why do you think that is? Just good police work?
Just good police work. They knew the neighborhood. They knew what was going on, and they knew where to look, and they knew how to develop it. They knew how to develop a case.
See that, Elizabeth? Good police work by Dominic. Yay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me ask Professor Schlossberg, with your psychology, is this, a typical criminal where it's an illegitimate, son, probably doesn't get a lot of attention? I think we talked about it, Jerry, of like why he targeted police officers. I think you said there was something, you told me the relation
Right.
of why he targeted a police officer, why he was
Well,
fixated on that.
Well,
Right.
again, he knew that he was given up for foster care. He knew that he was
Right.
given up at birth. And allegedly, and the way the story was told to him was that his biological father was a police officer.
That's
So
what
he
it was, right?
He
Mhm.
associated he associated being abandoned, which
Right,
is
with-
which is dramatic, for
Mhm.
anybody. So, and again, he was just a security guard. But in those times, just like Gerard said, the law of the land was the law of the land, and a security guard was almost like a police officer. So,
Right, right.
That's
So does that make sense? to you?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's an interesting connection, because the dynamic there would be the anger and aggression to his biological father that abandoned him. What I would also say is he struck me as low intelligence and basically an inadequate personality. He was not a fully developed, normal kind of person, and so the shootings and the stick-ups became his way of feeling more positive about himself. But probably the most powerful thing is what you just said about the biological father, because that was probably the unconscious motivation of killing cops.
right, and that's what he was looking for, to have a relationship with an older male, and it just happened to be his foster mother's biological son, who was also a gangster.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that could have been done with someone like that when they're younger and they get into trouble.
Well, it's
and
environment.
If you inform somebody,
It's environment
earlier
too. Yeah, it's environment
prevent-
too. Yeah.
really,
Yes.
yeah, to
But keep
prevent
in
that from happening.
You have to keep in mind that was a different time. It wasn't, people didn't, especially with foster children. I mean, you were talking about she was kind of a foster mother doing it for money, even in those days. But this kid was not in for counseling, and he didn't have the more positive role models to mentor him and to keep track of him. He was basically a street kid. And he learned from the street, and he learned from the ones who taught him the wrong thing to do, essentially. So
Right.
it was really a different time than we have now. Well, it's really an interesting story, and I've been glad to be part of it. I wouldn't mind saying a few words about our criminal justice division.
You just was reading my mind. I just first wanted to thank Elizabeth and Gerard for sharing their personal stories. And
It was great.
again, you can see where St. John's, we're one big family where we're kind of connected, and look, with this story, it brought us all together. So thank you for sharing your stories. And thank you for sharing your book. Oh, you're welcome, Gerard.
Where can we get the book?
Yes.
Well, that was my next. And then I'm going to turn it over to Professor Schlossberg just to talk about the great criminal justice program that we have at St. John's. But here's the book. And how can we get a copy of this book, Jerry?
Well, it's on Amazon Books, or you can get it at Goodreads, or if you want to get it from me, I can actually give you a signed copy. I'll give it's $21.99 through Amazon, plus tax, plus shipping. But for St. John's, I'll give it for $20. I'll sign it and I'll ship it. So
Wonderful.
for having me on and for allowing me to talk
That's
about my book.
super.
So-
Well, we're going to be sending a follow-up with all the information. So
Sure.
if you are interested, let us know, and then we'll forward it to Jerry and he can get you a copy. But before we leave, let's talk about the future law enforcers that we are grooming at St. John's with our criminal justice program.
Well, I'm gonna talk a little more broadly than that. The part of my my experience these days is also I'm the chair of the department. I'm happy to say that in a field where women represent roughly 7% of those who work in the criminal justice system, I've actually achieved being the chair of the department for Actually, a little more than 6 years. I have another year to my term. So our division is not just criminal justice. It's criminal justice, legal studies, and Homeland Security. And we have, as I've learned from Christine Goodwin, who's our institutional research pro, we serve roughly 1/3 of the majors in the Collins College of Professional Studies. We have over 500 majors in criminal justice. We have almost 400 majors in legal studies, and we have about 200 majors in Homeland Security. Just so you know, one of the things about any of our majors is they all have the wonderful liberal arts background that is part of the set of core courses that every student at St. John's University takes. And that allows students to go into many different directions. I mentioned to you I'm a psychologist. One of the things we know about young people is they don't really set their mind to a career path necessarily while they're in college. And many students change their mind and don't even settle into a career path until they're in their late 20s. While we have a number of students, I would say maybe about 15% of our students go into New York City law enforcement. Our students go in many different directions. The ones in criminal justice may go into federal law enforcement. They may work in government. Some of them become teachers, administrators, and so forth. We also have a specialty because, I mentioned earlier, my husband is also a psychologist and started psych services for NYPD. We started a specialty in forensic psychology. So we have students who also have on their transcript, and there's a big interest, of course, in the application of psychology to police work, and many of our students get that specialty. Our criminal justice students, as I said, they take the courses. They take courses in law. They take courses on the criminal justice system, and they take forensic psychology. They take forensic science. We have a forensic science lab, and students are learning about crime scenes, and they really like that area. Many of them come in with not very much science, but talk about a crime scene, and everybody thinks CSI, and we have lots of interest in that. You need to know about our paralegal studies program. Especially we have two of our guests are attorneys. We have an American Bar Association certified paralegal studies program. Our graduates move into law offices all over the city, all over the country. And many, besides being paralegals, also go on to law school. We have more than ever, many of our students are applying and being accepted into St. John's Law. And that's true of criminal justice as well as our legal studies program. So legal studies, they actually come out with a certification as an American Bar Association certified paralegal. So that's that. And then we have Homeland Security. And one of the things that the university invested in is we have a state-of-the-art Homeland Security lab on the second floor of St. Augustine Hall. And it was expensive, but the amount of learning that takes place with simulations, and of course we're working with a generation that's been trained to do everything on the computer. And this simulation lab helps our students to learn about leadership through situations that are created in scenarios that are computer generated. So it's an exciting program. And our students in Homeland Security, as well as our other students, are more frequently going into federal law enforcement. One of the interesting things about the students throughout our division, especially the criminal justice and Homeland Security students, many of them think of the FBI as, the be-all, end-all. And when we're working with students, we remind them that the criminal justice system is broader than that, and they need to think about other parts of the criminal justice system and the leadership that is needed. One of the things that people don't think about, for example, is the Department of Correction and or probation or parole, and we have leaders or diplomatic security. One of our graduates was the equivalent of a 4-star general in the Diplomatic Security Department of State agency. He's now a member of our Criminal Justice Advisory Board. So our students, and I usually tell them, and I know our other professors do as well, that starting is hard in most of the law enforcement and criminal justice field because it's government and you have to take tests and you have to get on lists, and government is slow, and especially now with the COVID virus, it's particularly slow. But once they start, our students really are successful in many different areas of the criminal justice system, whether they're whether they're going into law enforcement or law. We also, and I didn't mention, we have an MPS in Homeland Security and Criminal Justice Leadership. It's a master's degree that students can achieve either fully online or in the classroom. And as of two academic years ago, we started a doctoral program in Homeland Security. And that program is also doing very well. So we really have the gamut from undergraduate. Some students start they decide to enter the NYPD after an associate's degree. We can do that as well. I'm really proud of our program. And Susan, when you mention our students are everywhere, our alumni are everywhere, I meet St. John's graduates everywhere. I mean, when I've been at the San Diego Zoo, I've met St. John's graduates. When I've been at wakes in southern New Jersey, I suddenly find out I have relatives that all graduated, and I never knew. But suddenly everybody raises their hand. And our alumni love our students. Our alumni are very helpful to including interns, to hiring lawyers and paralegals. And I certainly encourage anyone who's listening, if you have an opportunity for a student to come work in your area, please let us know. I mean, I would personally connect you with the faculty in our division who handles the interns. And we have some of the best and the brightest of students. They're amazing. One of our graduates who recently reconnected with me is a sergeant in the NYPD, and actually used a methodology that we teach in the master's program to make a pitch, a proposal to the NYPD that cops need to carry tourniquets. And as a result of her proposal, which she says she learned in my research methods and capstone classes, 2 classes that are research-based. Students don't like research as a rule, but they have to do it. And she made a proposal, and now every police officer, once they're in uniform, one of the things in their vest is a tourniquet, and that tourniquet saves lives. And a big contribution to that as being carried is one of our grads. So we do amazingly well. I'm proud of the program, and the students. The feedback is good. It's been a little hard with COVID. I like to be back in the classroom myself, and so we move on. I'm certainly open to any questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a stellar program. I actually had the opportunity of taking a tour of the Homeland Security facilities, and it was very, very impressive. So thank you for sharing that with us. I don't know if anyone else, our viewers, have any questions. I was just checking and seeing. I don't think we have any questions. So does anyone else from the panel would like to add something before we close today's Power Hour? Gerard?
May I add something?
Yes, certainly.
This is Gerard. I'm so impressed with that review that the professor just gave you. I never knew that was in vogue. I think we also remember we have an outstanding dean who has been fostering St. John's and made it into a really one of the prime law schools in the country.
Yes, we do.
And I think we all are indebted to him for doing that. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate. I hope I didn't talk too much, but I'll finish with one of my favorite George Burns lines. I was happy to be here today, and I'm happy to be anywhere today. So,
You're great. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Gerard. Thank you for the plug for the law school. That's a diehard law school alumnus. Thank you. There's no questions. There's just one comment from one of our attendees that said this was excellent. And they also were a student at the Seton Hall Law School. So here's another connection. And also they want information about the book, and you'll certainly get that information. We'll send that along with the recording. But if you want to spread the word about our discussion today, all our power hours are recorded and they are on our YouTube channel, the St. John's Office of Gift Planning YouTube channel, and we'll give you that information as well. But before I leave you, we're very busy this week. We had this power hour, which was excellent. Thank you again, Jerry.
Well, thank you.
On Sunday, I'm very, very excited for our alumni. Sunday is National Philanthropy Day, November 15th. And at 1 o'clock on November 15th, we're going to have a wonderful discussion, Women in Philanthropy. And the panelists are, once again, really outstanding. You don't have to be in philanthropy to listen in on the discussion. It's really a great way that we can begin a really strong network with our alumni. So I hope you'll join us for that. And then on Tuesday, our next power hour, which is at 1 o'clock, we're talking about tax planning post-election and strategies. I think it's going to be very, very informative. So I hope you'll join us for that as well. So thank you again. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I certainly did, especially the part where Gerard actually saw Babe Ruth hit a baseball. I think that's unbelievable. that was worth every minute, right, of listening.
Yeah,
then.
absolutely.
Thanks, Gerard. I hope I get to see you in Florida in March.
I hope so too. You're always welcome.
Okay.
Thank you all. You were a great group to be working with. I really enjoyed it.
No, thank you. Nice meeting you.
Yes,
Thank you.
Professor
Thank you.
Schlossberg, thank
Yeah,
you. Did a great
absolutely.
job moderating.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you. And Jerry,
Elizabeth,
good luck
thank
with
you.
your book.
Thank you very much.
We look
Thank you.
forward to more books.
It was good.
Thanks. Okay.
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 Take care, everyone. Enjoy this
Bye.
beautiful
Bye-bye.
weather.
Yeah.
Thank
bye-bye.
you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.